Welcome to the Occult Rejects. On this episode, I am lucky enough to have one of the rejects himself on the show with me today, co-hosting. I got my boy, the Headless Giant. What is up, buddy? Thank you very much for coming on.
How's it going? Yeah, this is going to be a good one. I'm looking forward to the UFO discussion.
Yeah, you know, I really, I think we should have, honestly, more UFO discussions, to tell you the truth. This is kind of sounds a little silly, but I think we should. So I agree with that. I always like having UFO talk. And then that brings us to our guest. We got the man himself, Ryder Lee. It's probably been maybe 8 months to a year since the last time I had him on. He covered the Gateway Project. I highly suggest to go back and listen to that if you want to check it out on my podcast or even on YouTube. I'm pretty sure it's still on YouTube on this channel. Highly suggest to go check that out. Really good topic. He did some deep research on it, and I think it was well put together. So highly suggest to go check that out. And we got him on today to talk about, as we were saying, UFOs. So I'll shut up and I will let Ryder, please, since it's been a while, introduce yourself, let everybody know kind of what your gig is about, what your channel's about, and whatever.
Thanks so much for having me on. Really appreciate it. It's been a minute, so it's an honor and a privilege to be on your show, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Yeah, I'm Ryder Lee. I host and produce a podcast named Raised by Giants on YouTube and all the different podcast platforms. I basically just dive deep into all of these topics, and really I've been focusing on recently the UFO and extraterrestrial angle and all the myths and disinformation surrounding extraterrestrials and UFOs, because when you go back and you look at all of these stories, you really dig into them and you realize that it's nothing like what it seems. And I'm also a filmmaker. I recently made a documentary called JFKX. It is on Amazon Prime. If you're outside of the United States, you can get it on Vimeo.com and on Tubi for free if you're in Canada, the United States, and I believe Australia.
Oh, I'm going to have to check this out. I didn't even know about this. Wow, that's impressive. Good for you. Wow.
Yeah, did I not send you the link to it whenever it came out last year? I thought I did. I sent it to you.
You know what? Maybe you did, and I totally forgot. I'm sorry, but yeah, I'll definitely check it out for sure.
Yeah, no worries. And I've heard, it's just speculation, I've heard that a former president has seen the film and has confirmed it and has been the reason why the JFK files were not released. So, don't know. I hope it's true. I want it to be true. But that is the speculation as of now.
All right.
Very interesting. I love Tubi. They've got all the best stuff coming off of Amazon and things like that, and it's free. So everybody get Tubi. It's free. Check it out. JFKX on Tubi.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, so really what I want to talk about and what I've been diving into on my channel has been the series that I've started. I did a whole series on UFO cults, and I really dug into the whole ufology subject coming from these UFO cults. I did 14 episodes of that series, and now I've started a new series called The Legends of ufology. And I'm starting to examine a lot of these people from the very beginning. And we've really let the UFO and extraterrestrial speculation grow so far out of hand that I personally believe that it serves to make people easily fooled by scammers, grifters, and fraudsters that really prefer the lie and bring no evidence, no proof of what they're talking about. And this in turn could mean that any group or individual or government could use the modern myth of UFOs and extraterrestrials that may be bent upon destroying and undermining our society through the deceptiveness, mis and disinformation surrounding ufology. In this current contactee movement that started with a gentleman named Samuel Eden Thompson in 1950 that no one ever talks about because they've never even heard of him, because the story was overshadowed by Kenneth Arnold stories and his sightings in 1947, and then later on Betty and Barney Hill in 1961. Just like no one really ever talks about George Van Tassel, who was the first person to claim contact and channel Ashtar in 1952, or George King from the Aetherius Society, or Dorothy Martin from the Seekers UFO called in 1954. But this supposed contactee movement has brought about a wave that can only be described as mental illness, right? That can be specifically tied to this rise and popularization of the extraterrestrial myth, which is a huge aspect of ufology that literally no one wants to talk about, and it's a really huge issue, right? And I personally believe that human actions are based on imagination, belief, and faith, right? It's like the ufology has taken the place of Jesus and God, and they've just changed it into extraterrestrial saviors. And I'm pretty sure that the government, military, and politicians know this as well. You can pretty much track back everything to emotion and fear. And then the question becomes, can you control the human imagination? Can we shape and mold the world's collective consciousness? And if so, how do we do this? Well, you do it by making sure that the source of the control is never identifiable. Then you can effectively prepare the public for changes, unavoidable changes, and push the collective mind in the desirable direction that you want. And that's why it's important that these intelligence agencies, the advertising companies, are interested in mythology and things that may or may not be true, because it can be used to shape and mold the collective consciousness. This is why we've seen a rise in the contactee community and ufology as a whole, which is used to play with our imagination, which represents experiments in the direction of weaponized folklore, rising superstition, mental illness, and paranoia.
You know, I think that's a really good point. I hate to interrupt you, but I do think, and I've said this before, sometimes I think like our beliefs are also going to give us a reference point. So like if I'm believing that there's these little green men in this spaceship or whatever, if I believe that's a possibility, I may believe that I actually had an encounter with one of them when it was something else, and that's just my reference point to go back to. That's what my brain is like. That's like, I don't understand the situation, so I'm going to grab a hold of this little idea and thought that I have in my head, and I'm going to convince one side of it that it's real, regardless if it's not, just so I'm not scared.
Exactly. And that's been the common thread through all this research. I mean, when you look at the gray alien stuff, was not popular until Whitley Strieber's book Communion came out, and then everybody started seeing gray aliens. It's the exact same thing with Bud Hopkins' Missing Time book and the alien implant stuff, which was also made popular through Whitley Strieber. And then they just take on their own identity and their own belief system. And then before you know it, everyone is claiming that they have alien implants and that they're being abducted by gray aliens. And it just takes on this whole mythological role. It's unbelievable. And really the start of this starts with Kenneth Arnold in 1947. Right, and it tracks back way longer than Kenneth Arnold, but they weren't called UFOs or flying saucers back then. There were shields, pillars, flying chariots. You know, I'm just saying that because I realize the history of this stuff, and I can see someone in the comment section now saying, "Oh, well, it goes back way farther than 1947," which it does, but they weren't called flying saucers back then. Kenneth Arnold kicked off the term flying saucers. So for the people that aren't aware and want more information about Kenneth Arnold, he was a very well-respected aviator, businessman, and later on he was a politician. And he was the first in modern times to witness and report a strange craft in the sky on June 24th, 1947. He was piloting his A-2 plane in the skies near Mount Rainier, Washington, searching for missing Marine aircraft, and witnessed a string of 9 objects at what he claimed was around 10,000 feet. They flew at amazing speeds of what was estimated at 1,500 miles an hour. He said the objects lacked tails and reflected sunlight and were bat-shaped, moon-shaped, and shaped like sometimes referred to it as a pie pan. So after witnessing these craft, he landed his plane in Yakima, Washington, and told his friend Al Baxter about the sighting. Arnold then shared his story with other pilots that said that maybe he had saw military craft, experimental military craft, or military missiles, right? But Arnold not being satisfied with that explanation and not really being convinced that it was possibly military missiles or experimental military aircraft, he walked into a news station, a local news station in Washington, and told his story to a gentleman named Nolan Skiff. Now, Nolan Skiff published a short article with the headline saying impossible, maybe, but seeing is believing. And then that story was forwarded to the Associated Press for worldwide distribution. And then the term flying saucer was born, right? But when you look at Arnold's testimony, which he did a lot of interviews and a lot of radio shows, he never used the term flying saucer to describe the shape of the craft.
You did a short on this recently, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
It was like, yo, that right there was like amazing. I was like, I wish more people just even heard of this.
Yeah, and it's
Most people have no idea.
They don't have any idea, and it's unbelievable that he never said that the shape of the craft was saucer shaped. He said it was bat shaped, crescent shaped, boomerang shaped, and sometimes half moon shaped. And he often said that his comments on his sightings were misunderstood, and he ended up really working hard up until 1984, whenever he passed away, to combat the flying saucer narrative. So the sketches that Arnold provided, which is an image right here, does that look like a flying saucer to you?
No.
That's not a flying saucer.
It actually looks like the end of an Egyptian. I can't remember what it was. But yeah, that's really interesting.
Well, to me, it looks like the B-2 stealth bomber.
Yeah.
Here's another image of it
I'm sure
without
there's
him.
plenty of gods and goddesses that have something like that very close to it on them as well.
Now, what had happened was Nolan Skiff, the journalist that published Arnold's story in the newspaper, said that Arnold sighted 9 saucer-like aircraft. And the media took that saucer-like aircraft and created headlines saying saucer-shaped craft were spotted, when Arnold literally never referred to the shape of the craft as saucer-shaped. Again, it was bat-shaped, crescent-shaped, half moon-shaped, or shaped like a pie pan. An interview later on in the United Press, he said that it was half moon-shaped and it was oval in the front and a convex in the back. So in June of 1947, Arnold, he came out with that drawing of it. And by this time, the media had already jumped on the whole flying disc thing. And you would think by him coming out with this drawing of what he had saw would stop all the flying disc and the flying saucers and stuff. But it became such a frenzy topic with everyone reporting strange craft and all this stuff that it was too late by then. It became so popular. And Arnold had even said that everyone else that was claiming the reported strange craft in the sky, he said that what other people were seeing or reporting was something else or nothing at all. So Kenneth Arnold was telling people back in 1947 that they're just making shit up, right? And another quote from Arnold states that he feels that it should be labeled a strange type of aircraft instead of flying saucers. So in 1950, Arnold pretty much comes out and he just spills the beans on the whole flying saucer misrepresentation and misquote. Arnold said that the objects that he witnessed fluttered like they were boats on very rough water. And this next part is very important because this is where the whole misquote comes in. He said that when the craft flew, they flew like a saucer thrown across the water. Right. And all of the newspapers misunderstood him and misquoted him, saying that the shape of the craft was the saucer shape. Arnold said that they flew like a saucer skipping across water, and all the headlines printed that they were saucer in shape, which is probably the biggest misquote and misrepresentation of what Arnold said of all time, right? Now, here's something that is
I mean, even see, I even think like if you were to go by the way he's describing how it looks, if we were to ever see that again, it would look very different than what most people think are UFOs now.
exactly.
Just from the way, like, I'm assuming if it says it's skipping, I would even think, does it look like it's even going like that? You know, or like spinning, like I've never seen anybody put out a UFO video that did anything like that. You know, and
Yeah.
that it would just be very weird.
Yeah, and that's why he said that the thing that he saw was completely different than what anybody else was claiming to report at that time, right? Now, this is where things get super perplexing, and even the people that know about this don't even know what to think about it, because it's really, really interesting, and the people, they don't want to look at this because it's so like mind-boggling, and people really don't know what to think. And I have to admit, when I first looked into it, I was really perplexed by it as well. And I found this through a gentleman that I have interviewed a few times. His name is Chris Albeck. He wrote a book titled Saucers. It's on Amazon for you to pick up. But the term flying saucer predates Arnold's sightings by 67 years before it was associated with UFOs. Flying saucers was a sport which was called trap shooting, which started in the late 1800s as a way to train hunters and shooters, in which they would release live birds from a cage and use them as target practice. And then was later changed to these clay pigeons, these flat discs, and they were named flying saucers because of their shape.
Couldn't you even shoot those in Duck Hunt?
Yes. Yeah, good old Duck Hunt on Nintendo. That was a fun game. So the name flying saucers was dubbed by a man named Charles Lewitsky in 1880, and he dubbed these little clay pigeons flying saucers. So by the early 1900s, flying saucers had become a very popular sport. There were competitions, championships, and there was news headlines that would say that the skies of North America were covered in flying saucers flying through the air, exploding and falling to Earth, which is the exact replica of the phrases of what everyone thought several decades later with Kenneth Arnold sightings, the Roswell incident, and a lot of the sightings from the 50s, right?
Well, doesn't that just point to a wider representation of what's going on when it comes to most of these sightings? It's like imagination into a frenzy, right? And so the people had this imaginary connection already with the flying saucer, and then they took a hold of it like it had a handle and then applied it to all the rest of this stuff. So basically the imagination sort of ran this course that would be natural for a person who doesn't have any frame of reference for this entire phenomenon.
Exactly, and that is where the misnomer begins. And by the 20th century, the name flying saucer had become such a commonplace name, and it was being used for over 2 decades. The sport of flying saucer had become so popular, it was adopted by the Olympics in 1916. The number of participants in the sport of flying saucers was 600,000 people in the U.S. They all knew the term and the name flying saucer because they would call these little clay pigeons flying saucers, and it was a sport of shooting flying saucers. The military even adopted it to train their soldiers in target practice in the beginning of World War II. And you'll have to put that one together there. And as war,
at least even what you're pointing at, I do think there is at least proof to show that there is some sort of, you could have been very susceptible due to being influenced by what you're saying. Like, as silly as that sounds, I really do think like what you're saying, I think is very possible. And I think we've seen that happen with UFOs now. And my opinion, even to an extent, like the conspiracy community with QAnon. You know what I'm saying? Like you really like just let imaginations run wild with some stuff. And then what's crazy is that just as crazy as the far left is. If you don't believe my outlandish concoctions, you're fucking wrong.
Right. Well, I've got a different angle for you. So back then, I mean, it's sort of fallen out of favor with the occult community, but back then it was very popular to have tea readings where the tea leaves would come out on the saucer, and then the psychic would read the tea leaves. And if you think about it, in a lot of ways, this is sort of like the vision of the future is this flying saucer phenomenon, and this is sort of like reading the tea leaves, and it's sort of, you know, bringing that sort of bridge from this past sort of view of the future to basically, you know, space since 1947 has shaped everybody's imagination in that way and sort of given us that vision of the future.
Yeah,
So
because
it's kind of interesting that the saucer angle's right there.
Yep, and it was already in our subconscious mind, and then when they came out and rebranded it and gave a different meaning to it, that these craft are extraterrestrial craft, people were already familiar with the term flying saucers, and because they were being called flying saucers since 1880, hundreds and thousands of people were familiar with the term, and the military adopted the term and practiced in the early 40s during World War II. And 2 years after the war ended, we get the term flying saucer, but under a different context. It's really unbelievable. And the book Saucer by Chris Albeck really puts all of this into perspective and really immerses you into the whole terminology behind flying saucers and trap shooting. He has all the news headlines and everything in his book, and you really see how popular this sport here was. So what we have is that the entire subject of ufology is based on a fallacy, and ufology has been using the shape of a round disc when it was never described by Arnold as a disc or a flying saucer. So we've literally had the shape of the craft wrong this entire time. For 77 years, we've essentially been telling and regurgitating a misrepresentation of what Arnold saw. And out of Arnold's own words, what others have claimed to have saw during that time wasn't the same thing, or it was nothing at all. And I challenge anyone to find a quote of Arnold saying that the shape of the craft was a saucer.
That was the one thing that I really thought exactly what you're getting at here. What really impressed me with that short that you did. I mean, it's, you know, as silly as it sounds, you're very correct in the fact that if that's true, this whole thing has been, believed on a lie.
Yep.
The whole image of what we have of those is constructed due to a lie.
Yep.
So, like, we got to start all over again.
Exactly. The entire flying saucer mythology is a lie. It's a fallacy. It's a misnomer, and it's misinterpreted quote from newspaper reporters, journalists, and researchers. And it's still the most popular symbol of ufology to this very day, even though it's not called flying saucers so much anymore. But I seen Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp on Twitter the other day calling them flying saucers again. And I commented on it and got into an argument with a person. But flying saucers are the basis and the root of modern ufology. Every conference, every UFO documentary, YouTube thumbnails use the flying saucer art when it's a lie. That's never what they look like. Now,
think about the other context, the X-Files. That poster he has in his office, it's the perfect representation of this whole flying saucer fallacy. Is he wants to believe that that's real, and that's really what really carries this forward, is the desire to believe that it's real.
That's right. That's exactly right. And it's just a coincidence. I think I forgot to mention this earlier when I was talking about George Lewitsky, that actually dubbed the term flying saucer back in 1880. He also said the exact same thing that Kenneth Arnold said. He said that he got the same thing, the same idea of calling these clay pigeons flying saucers from watching kids toss saucers across water, which is exactly what Kenneth Arnold said 67 years later, that the craft flew like saucers skipping across water. make that one make sense.
Something you had mentioned before, I didn't want to because I know you're kind of talking on the topic of the ship, but even before when you were talking about 1947, and you were even saying, I know this stuff goes, prior to that. I do find it interesting, Aleister Crowley gave us the image of a lamb, and I do think that is very much kind of looks like a gray to me, or at least or an original version of it maybe. Well, he died in 1947, so I even find that interesting is how all this shit starts spurring as soon as he's supposedly dead as well. I mean, that's the date we're given, December 1st, 1947 is when he died. Who knows? But I just find that interesting on that same year is when all this starts to kick up as well. Because in my opinion, something you had even mentioned before too, that you kind of touched on, there are a lot of, I mean, I'd say some occults for sure, or some of a group of occultists that back in the day, it was huge, it was almost like this surgence of channeling.
Yep.
That's right. The one of the first channelers that I mentioned earlier was George Van Tassel from Giant Rock, California, that supposedly channeled Ashtar. See, there was a lot of things that was happening in 1947. 1947 was the start of the Cold War. 1947, the National Security Act, which created and reorganized foreign policy and the military establishments of governments, and the Air Force was born along with the CIA and the DoD, all came out of this National Security Act of 1947. There was a lot of things that was happening in 1947. When you look at all the events that was happening, it's wow. I feel like 1947 was a really big turning point for where the United States was heading, right?
It was a new gold rush. They wanted to shape the consciousness and shape the future, and 1947 was the start of that gold rush. They were all trying to get their hands on it, trying to shape the narrative and get it into people's heads as quick as possible. See, that's the thing that always confused me is the UFO cover-up. Well, not in mainstream culture. They're always talking about it. They're always telling you about it. They're always asking you to wonder about it.
Yeah. And that's to strike your imagination. But see, they've been telling us since the very beginning of this stuff, government officials, they've been telling us that it has nothing to do with extraterrestrials. But people think that there's this huge giant cover-up going on, that they aren't willing to believe them when they say it has nothing to do with extraterrestrials, when the cover-up is actually the real cover-up, right? And when you look into Paul Benowitz, if you fast forward a couple of decades into the future, into Paul Benowitz and all the events that surround him in 1979, it is very clear that the government was feeding him mis and disinformation. He was a radio scientist. He founded a company named Thunder Scientific, which was a small family business with his wife, Cindy, and he would develop high-tech powered instruments for NASA and the Air Force. And during the 70s, Benowitz became a member of Arizona's Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization, which was a civilian UFO investigation group. And by the mid-70s, cattle mutilations have become associated with UFOs. It was a very big topic in Arizona and in New Mexico.
Sometimes I think that's occult symbolism, or that's a mark of an occultist.
The bull,
yes,
very important.
The cow, yeah. Now, Paul Benowitz attended a meeting about cattle mutilations, and some people believe that this is where the government agents likely first infiltrated into Paul Benowitz and started feeding him mis and disinformation. Because at this meeting, Paul Benowitz was introduced to a highway patrol officer named Gabe Valdez, who was investigating the incidents, which that's an important thing to mention right off the bat because it ties into the story later on. So Benowitz later listed July 1979 as the beginning of a personally funded study into UFOs, because Benowitz reportedly began filming strange lights and recording unusual radio signals over Kirkland Air Force Base. So Paul Benowitz, he would go out on his back patio deck, and Kirkland Air Force Base was only like a half a mile away. He would see these strange lights, mainly two bright lights, slowly lift up off of the ground and zip back around the mountain. So what common sense would tell you is if you're filming something strange over a military base, right, it's more than likely the military base, right? It's like old Jeremy Corbell taking pictures of some flares over a military base and calling them UFOs when they're proven to be flares, right? And if you're the military at that time in 1979, and some random guy is possibly in possession of video with top secret craft and has supposedly recorded radio transmissions of top secret operations, what do? Right? So Paul, being a radio expert, he's very well versed in radio technology. He decided to try and listen into the communications at Kirkland Air Force Base to try and figure out what these strange lights were and what he was seeing. So he ended up decoding some of the radio transmissions and put together on his own that it was about technology and that the technology wasn't from here. So then that took him into this journey into the extraterrestrial realm. So in October of 1980, Benowitz contacted Kirkland Air Force Base to report his findings, like any good Samaritan or person would do. But at this point, Benowitz is kind of like, okay, well, I'm going to try and go in and see what they know. I'll give him a briefing on my findings. And Benowitz briefed the people at Kirkland Air Force Base on his findings. The military personnel possibly thought maybe this could be a Soviet threat or another country or someone planning to invade the base. So to figure out more about what Paul Benowitz knew, here's a picture of Paul Benowitz. To figure out more about what he knew and to examine the video and the radio transmissions that he was collecting, they sent in a person by the name of Richard Doty. And Richard Doty was an AFSOI, Air Force Special Office of Investigations. Paul not really knowing what he had because he didn't analyze them properly. Richard Doty figuring out pretty quickly after going to his house to speak with him, examining the footage and examining the radio transmission, was what he had was top secret transmissions from the Air Force Base that didn't have anything to do with extraterrestrials. But Richard Doty's job was to come in and convince him that it was extraterrestrials and that it had to do with extraterrestrial craft, right? He didn't outright tell him that, like, hey, this is definitely extraterrestrials. What you got here is for sure extraterrestrials. These transmissions you're receiving is definitely from extraterrestrial aliens, right? He just planted the seed. He was kind of like, that's how mis and disinformation works. You just plant a little freaking seed there, and it's for them to expand on and then tell everybody else about, right?
Sometimes you just have to create the option.
That's right. So he would say something like, Paul, yeah, man, some of these, this is really interesting stuff. You got some, compelling evidence here. Maybe this is extraterrestrial craft. And that just convinced Paul even more because he already had his preconceived notions that maybe this craft was extraterrestrial craft. And it was easy to keep him quiet because he was a veteran. He was a World War II vet. And he was like, oh, well, Richard Doty was like, hey, man, like, be quiet now. You owe it to your country not to say anything about this to anyone. So keep all this information, keep all these radio transmissions that you're getting and the footage that you're taking of these extraterrestrials to yourself. But it wasn't just Doty that was doing this. All of the generals during Paul's briefing to the Air Force was in on it. After Paul showed the footage he captured of the strange craft, which was top secret experimental military aircraft, a brigadier general stood up and said, Paul, buddy old pal, you got some pretty convincing evidence there. And asked him, he said, what would you like the Air Force to do about it? And Paul replied with, well, sir, I would like a grant to continue to examine and research UFOs on the base. And I would also like a grant to continue my contact with extraterrestrials that he claimed that he had. Now, this is where it gets very sinister and actually took the Air Force off guard. So we've established that the Air Force special investigators like Richard Doty and all the Air Force personnel were involved in that briefing, were pushing Paul in the direction of extraterrestrials and UFOs, when what he was really getting was video footage of top secret experimental aircraft and radio transmissions from the Air Force base. But another agency was also involved. And what had happened was Paul was picking up these signals from Kirkland Air Force Base. He didn't really know what it was. He didn't really know that he was getting these transmissions from Kirkland Air Force Base. So the NSA posted up across the street from Paul Benowitz's house and would directly beam radio signals into Paul's antenna, into his house, to make Paul believe he was getting what he should be getting and seeing things that he thought that he should be seeing. The NSA literally broke into Paul Benowitz's house, replaced his computer with an NSA modified computer. The computer had software installed on it to decode the messages that was being sent to him in the way that they wanted Paul to see it.
You know what? You know what was wild? It reminds me of something of maybe you might have even came across this type of stuff. When I had originally years ago kind of dug into the Gateway Project with Lux when we went to cover it, there was also files of stuff to do with like the NSA and stuff that was like listed with that. And when I was looking into the NSA stuff, they were like actually admitting back in like the 1970s, I think, that they had this technology that was like, you know, already, you know, used. It definitely works. That like they were saying that they'd be able to put somebody in like a city and they should be able to affect probably like a 6,000 people around them with like this one little contraption that will actually kind of get them to think specific shit. I was like, yo, what the fuck? I was like, yo, just think if that was back then, what can they do now? Right. How do we know what those microwave things were that they put up in the Cold War actually for all these fucking poles?
Well, what Ryder's describing right there is counterintelligence, right? So NSA is engaging in counterintelligence on American citizens with the express purpose of tracking where that counterintelligence is going. They're seeing the network that this guy is involved with. So a lot of human intelligence is all about mapping out who you're spreading this disinformation to. And it could just be a small little line, but basically all they're trying to do is to try and figure out how they can influence that entire network with these, pieces of information that, they fabricated. And in doing so, they can affect the entire network.
That's exactly right. And in these messages that Paul thought that he was receiving from extraterrestrials, which was really the NSA, said that they were from a planet with no water, that they're here for our resources and to take over Earth, and that they only trusted Paul because Paul was the chosen ones, and like all kinds of different stuff, which a lot of the things that were being talked about with Paul Benowitz, him believing that he's in communication with extraterrestrials, are still regurgitated in this community to this very day. And they're completely and utterly made up by NSA agents.
Wasn't there a guy who admitted at one of these conferences that he created all these messages? And even after saying that, like the UFO conference didn't want to believe that he was the one behind it.
That was Bill Moore. That was Bill Moore in 1989. He wrote the book on Roswell called The Roswell Incident that was filled with nothing but government mis and disinformation. And he tried to get up in front of the conference and tell everyone that it's all made up nonsense from government mis and disinformation, and they booed him off of the stage.
Unreal. I want to believe.
And and it even gets even worse. So remember I mentioned that cattle mutilation conference back in the beginning of what we were talking about with Paul Benowitz. May of 1980, state police in New Mexico received a report from a woman calling herself Myrna Henson, and she described a story of involving extraterrestrial aliens, bright lights, and herds of cattle. Now, police referred that case to their colleague in Dulce named Gabe Valdez, who was the gentleman that was introduced to Paul in 1979 at the cattle mutilation conference. And they referred that case to him, which in turn contacted Paul Benowitz. So in 1980, Myrna Henson and her son traveled to Albuquerque, New Mexico to meet with Paul. Staying in his home, Henson explained to Benowitz that on May 5th, 1980, while she was driving with her son in New Mexico, they had witnessed two large objects the size of a Goodyear blimp hovering over a meadow, right? If it looks like a blimp, sounds like a blimp, moves like a blimp, it's probably a blimp, right? But they then contacted a gentleman named Leo Sprinkle. He was a psychologist and regressionist and a professor at the University of Wyoming who had been investigating UFO contactees reports. And Benowitz arranged for Sprinkle to fly to Albuquerque to hypnotize Henson. When Sprinkle arrived, Henson and Benowitz insisted that the sessions be conducted in a tinfoiled out town car parked inside of his garage with all of the windows covered in thick aluminum foil, right? Paul is basically out of his mind at this point, which I don't blame him. You got the NSA right across the street beaming frequencies and stuff into the antenna of your house, making you believe that you're in contact with extraterrestrials. You got the Air Force special investigators telling you that you're right about the aliens, but you can't tell anyone, right? I don't blame him. So Sprinkle decided to regress this woman, Myrna Henson, in the tinfoiled out car in Paul Benowitz's garage. And during her first regression, she reported a recollection of cows being sucked up into a hovering spaceship by a tractor beam, right? She already knew previously that Paul Benowitz was into the cattle mutilation stuff. So then another hypnosis session, Henson reported recollections and memories of being abducted and taken to an underground base with body parts floating in big vats. These regressions would later evolve into the mythology of the Dulce base. And Phil Schneider, I'm sure people are familiar with Phil Schneider's story in the Dulce base.
Missing fingers.
So also during one of the sessions, which gets into the Bill Moore stuff that I was just mentioning at the conference and all of his stuff being made up mis and disinformation from the government, she also said that, where's Roswell? Where's Roswell, New Mexico? And at that time in 1980, no one in the public had connected the town of Roswell, New Mexico to UFO folklore, which was the perfect setup for Bill Moore's book on Roswell called The Roswell Incident that I was just mentioning, which came out a few months later in October of 1980, which was all mis and disinformation about alien craft crashing in Roswell, which popularized the myth and the lore and brought it to the forefront of ufology, which Richard Doty was also involved with. He also gave all that information to Bill Moore for Bill Moore to write that book. So
I read that book as a kid, like young. I was born in '78, so I mean, it was only out, I think by like 1980, I probably had read it.
Yeah,
I mean, not 1980, 1990.
Yeah, it was a very popular book that cemented the lore and the mythology of Roswell when it was all mis and disinformation directly from the government. So really quickly, back to the Myrna Henson story and this Paul Benowitz setup, because that's exactly what it is. It was a setup with this lady, Myrna Henson, to get the lore and the mythology rolling, because they knew Paul Benowitz would tell everyone, and this would snowball into a bunch of nonsense. So Henson, along with claiming that these large blimp-like craft, she also recalled being given alien implants by the aliens during her regression with Sprinkle. So here comes all the alien implant lore, which was popularized by Whitley Strieber in his book Communion. Sprinkle then returned back to visit Paul Benowitz to perform another regression with Henson to apparently figure out more mis and disinformation from this agent named Myrna Henson that was more than likely sent to him by the intelligence community. He found Benowitz with a pistol and a rifle, saying that he was concerned that he was vulnerable to being attacked by aliens. These people were literally driving Paul Benowitz out of his mind, to the point that he was thinking that he was going to be attacked by aliens. It's a very sad story at the root of it.
Well, think about the themes, right? So you've got this constant theme of being monitored, right? It's not just you're looking at them, they're looking at you. Perfect for the NSA, because the NSA is not there to actually directly police people. What they want to do is they want to create the perception of constant monitoring, and they've done a great job of that, right? And so you've got this constant theme of monitoring, constant theme of abduction. You've got all these themes that the government is basically putting forward to create this hysteria, which works perfectly well with the Cold War hysteria that they were also putting out at the exact same time. So these things are meshing together really well psychologically. It's like you're given this sort of magic spell on both fronts,
And no one wants to talk about this stuff. I've had several people not want to do shows with me because it destroys their whole preconceived notions of extraterrestrials, and they don't want to believe that it's all government and mis and disinformation from three-letter organizations and from the military, right? So Benowitz then thought that Sprinkle was an alien or whatever it was that he thought that he was, and he told him to leave. And then this is where it gets interesting. If it wasn't interesting already, Paul Benowitz contacts a man named James Harder. James Harder had also conducted the hypnotic regression on Travis Walton in 1975, which is a whole other story. I don't really want to get off track or off base with this story, but I'm going to be covering it in the future. I'm going to do a whole show on Travis Walton on my series, Legends of Ufology.
Nice.
But Paul Benowitz and James Harder, the gentleman that regressed Travis Walton in 1975, came to the conclusion that Myrna Henson, this fake agent that had been sent to Paul Benowitz to give mis and disinformation directly to him, was under the influence of alien beams, alien tractor beams. And they wrote several detailed instructions, several detailed notes on how to use aluminum foil to shield the room from these alien tractor beams. Right? This is literally where all of the tinfoil hat stuff came from. And no one knows, no one has any idea that it came from government mis and disinformation surrounding Paul Benowitz, convincing him that he was seeing extraterrestrials, that he was in contact with extraterrestrials when it was advanced military craft, and it was the NSA that broke into his house and replaced his computer with an NSA modified computer. Gabriel Valdez's son later made his comments and his statements on the whole Myrna Henson story, which I believe in. Valdez's son also came to the same conclusion that the whole story was a giant operation. It was a huge ops, and it was a hoax. And because of listening devices that was found at Gabe Valdez's house, the government had heard all of the conversations on the phone between Gabe Valdez and Benowitz, and he basically said that it would have been relatively easy to accomplish Myrna Henson coming into the picture and feeding Paul Benowitz all of this nonsense. And it's hard to figure out anything about Myrna Henson, because Myrna Henson is also the name of a famous actress and model who won Miss USA in 1953. So it's dang near impossible to figure out who she was and exactly who she was. Because when you type in Myrna Henson into Google, you don't get this lady that was a part of this agency that gave Paul Benowitz all this mis and disinformation directly from the government. You get the actress and the lady and model who won Miss USA in 1953.
Well, here's your 3-letter agency.
That's incredible. So to me, that smacks of like they've got agents ready to assume all sorts of any kind of identity they want to feed you this kind of information so that they can start these cults. And I think it's really interesting when you look at cults politically, right? Yeah. So there's a chain of events that happen with a cult, right? First, you've got the guys behind the scenes who have decided they want to start a cult. You get the charismatic leader or the guy with the special knowledge that brings together all the sheep, right? And then the most enthusiastic first sheep, they've got to go, right? Because they know too much and, they have too much of a memory. So that's when the purge starts. And then the people who rise up in the ranks of the purgers, the ones that can get rid of the original people the most unscrupulous ones, they assume the new title as the leader of this cult, right? And then they start to move on to infiltrate the government, because that's the ultimate goal, is to ultimately get closer and closer to the center of power, right? And so you get this constant cycle of cults influencing politics in this way. And you can see it with the Scientologists. You could see it with the UFO cults are now starting to do that, right? We're starting to see that UFO hysteria start to play out on the floor of the Senate and the House. We're seeing it happen. So this whole thing is part of this cyclical nature of cults. And it goes back to the beginning of mankind, really. It's the cult gets close to power and has these purges over and over again. So I don't think this is anything new, but once you understand the cycle and you can see it, it's really hard to unsee it.
It really is. And it's interesting that you bring up these cults and wanting to overthrow the government. That is what the cult...
It's never overthrow. It's always get close and then sort of merge into it, because when they can merge into it, then they have cover. Once they have cover, there's no need to overthrow the government anymore. They're part of it.
Yeah, not all of them, but the first cult, the cult of I Am by Guy and Edna Ballard, that was their mission statement, was to overthrow the government and install a new government with the Ascended Masters. That was in the 30s. That was in the early 30s. But that was their whole mission statement. And that you can basically take the cult of I Am with Guy and Edna Ballard and replace it with Donald Trump and JFK Jr., and you have almost the exact same thing. You have the QAnon cult.
I showed somebody before, someone's comment, somebody who, in my opinion, does understand occultism to an extent, and they were saying something about Lamb and I Am and all this other stuff like being the same thing. So I do find that interesting, with the chakras and stuff.
Yeah, the cult of I Am is a very interesting cult that started in 1934, and they basically just ripped off a bunch of other occultists and people of that time, because Edna Ballard, she ran an occult bookstore and would read all these occult books like Elena Blavatsky, Edgar Cayce, Rudolf Steiner, and all these people of the time, and that became the basis of the information of this cult. But yeah, you're right in saying that a lot of them, they want to merge in with the government. But the very first one, the cult of I Am, their whole thing was well, we need to overthrow the government. And how we're going to do that is these ascended masters are going to come down like Saint Germain and Jesus. And that's where we get the
Saint
popularization
Germain,
of.
that was the one. Yeah, because they still have a building in Philadelphia, right outside of what's that? There's this canyon in Philadelphia, and they're right outside of that. And that was where the first like sort of Rosicrucian cult started in like the 1700s. So I mean, this whole thing, you got to start a cult, and then you can start to influence this process. And they've known about it over and over again. And this is why 1947 is so important, is because it got the ball rolling. They're always looking to get that ball rolling so that they can start these little spin-off groups and spin-off groups of spin-off groups and spin-off groups of spin-off groups. And then you can merge them all into one. This is the theory, at least. You can merge them all into one when you've got a powerful enough narrative. And we're getting close to that point, I think, with all of this disclosure movement, you know?
That's exactly right. And you see a resurgence of the UFO cults in the early 50s. And that was right after MK Ultra was started by the CIA, right? All of them started sprouting up in the early 50s. Ashtar Galactic Command cult, the Secret UFO cult, the Theorist Society cult, the Unarius Academy cult, all came from the early 50s, from like 52 to 54. All of them started popping up. So you really only had the one, the cult of I Am from the 30s. And then right after 1947 and all this stuff started happening, the formation of the CIA and the CIA starting these MK Ultra programs, you get this big influx of all these UFO cults starting like right after it. And I don't think that that's a coincidence.
Well, Guy and Edna, weren't they really closely talking about Mount Shasta a lot?
That is where all of the theories and the speculations of Mount Shasta came from.
Right. And that carries straight over into the UFO cults. Just
into the New Age community and all of it. Yep, that's exactly it. It's just regurgitation after regurgitation. They take a little bit of this, a little bit of that. That's what the whole Heaven's Gate cult was all about. They literally went around the United States and visited all these New Age centers and all these people that considered themselves prophets and New Age people, and then collected all the information to form the basis of their cult, just like the cult of I Am did. But yes, you're completely 100% correct that is where all the mythology of Mount Shasta comes from, the lost continent of Atlantis and Lemuria and these beings that are inside of Mount Shasta. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, the white college of Holy Brothers really carried over hard into the UFO cults with the Space Brothers, right? So it's the Space Brothers now instead of this Brotherhood of Occultists, this white college, right? And just 1-to-1 copied straight over,
That's exactly right. Elena Blavatsky called them the Brotherhood of Light. Guy and Edna Ballard called them the Brotherhood of Mount Shasta. Other people, I believe the Seekers UFO called in 1953 also called them the Brotherhood of Light, and that the Brotherhood of Light was going to come and see that the United States was going to be destroyed by a giant natural disaster in 1953, December 22nd or 23rd of 1953. The United States was going to be destroyed by a natural disaster, and these great white Brotherhood of Light was going to come in their extraterrestrial ships and save them from that amazing, great catastrophe that was going to happen. And then it never happens. Every one of these UFO cults, dude, all have some sort of fantastical prediction that never comes true. It just doesn't.
You know who I think is also huge in pushing the whole UFO and alien thing? The Mormons. Especially with Skinwalker Ranch, with stuff that I did with Lux, like probably almost 2 years now. But like even stuff with that, I mean, it's just and they're very interesting because it's almost like a mixture of kind of what you said before. They're in the government for sure. But I mean, I think it's quite like I think they're a little bit like we're just going to take advantage of this.
No.
But who knows? Maybe they are trying to manipulate it as well. But they are in the government and they are kind of very cult-like, and they do have some people that do believe into UFO type shit and alien type stuff at some point with that stuff as well. Well, I mean,
It
that's
seem-
really out there.
yeah, it seems to be in like a 20-year kind of cycle with these cults going back to the 50s, because around 1954, 1953, we seen that big spring up around the MK Ultra, and then 20 years later in 1974, we get the same exact thing. We get Raelianism during that time. We get with the gentleman Rael that supposedly came in contact with these Elohim extraterrestrials that told him how they survived forever is through cloning. Then he opens up a cloning center in Canada and claims to have cloned many people. And the first one was, I believe, in 2001, and they named her Eve. It's just a huge, long mess of thing. But then you also have the Heaven's Gate cult in 1974 that started in 1974. And then you have a lot of the cults that were starting up in, and I think also in 1974, you get the Order of the Solar Temple as well. But that might have been a little bit later.
Yeah, I wanted to cover them. That's a wild story. That was like choreographed between 2 or 3 different countries for mass suicide.
Yep, Switzerland.
Sorry about that. Spam.
Switzerland, Canada, and
Or maybe it was just them two. I do know at least 2
Yeah.
countries off a lot of people, too, in my opinion.
yeah, that was either 1984 or 1974. I'm not. I'd have to look up the date, but a lot of those. It seems like every 20 years, like we get like a lot of these like cults and these weird things like pop up, and
They were
just
very tied to occultism. Those original people,
yeah, they were
That's
very
why I wanted to cover
Mason,
them, actually, because they
very
fell heavily into
very Masonic, very
Golden Dawn-ish almost kind
they,
of.
they would only accept people that had a abnormally large bank account. And then when you look at Switzerland too, dude, Switzerland is where a lot of elite people set out there. So yeah, they had the whole handle on the Order of the Solar Temple and getting people in there to that had a lot of money that could support their entire cult and all of their operations. But yeah, it seems like it's like every 20 years, like a lot of these cults start popping up when you go back and look through the history of it. But really quickly, I wanted to finish up this on Paul Benowitz, because it gets into the Dulce base, and literally where with Paul Benowitz is where all the speculation and theories of a contract with extraterrestrials come from, and that Eisenhower signed that later on Bill Cooper made very popular. So in December of 1981, Paul Benowitz wrote a letter to a U.S. senator, and the letter stated that he knew the location of the alien base in northern New Mexico, northwest of Dulce, New Mexico. He said that someone in the military had made a deal with extraterrestrials several years ago, giving them land and cattle and apparent assurance of safety to the aliens to create a base in exchange for technology in the form of what he described as an atomic powered ship at the exact same time, while establishing an extensive U.S. extraterrestrial base alongside them to test this ship. And another thing that's really interesting that is talked about in this letter by Paul Benowitz is that the ship design that they traded the land and the cattle for was over 30 years behind the alien technology, which is something that has been regurgitated by several people. I've heard so many people talk about, whenever they talk about this contract with extraterrestrials, that they were screwing us by giving us old technology, which is completely made up. So in 1984, Benowitz again referred to this 1979 conflict at Dulce base that led to the closure of this alien human base, which again was completely made up fiction of the Duluth base, which would later be regurgitated by many in the community, including John Lear, Bill Cooper, and again, most famously, Phil Schneider, right? And we know that all these stories came from Paul Benowitz. That's what Bill Cooper always talked about in the mid 80s, was this contract with the U.S. government and extraterrestrials for a technology exchange. But Bill Cooper just added that it was Eisenhower that made the contract and sealed the deal. He just changed it just slightly, right? And Phil Schneider is a whole other story that I will be covering in the future as well. So by 1982, Paul Benowitz began contacting all of these other UFO researchers, like Linda Moulton Howe.
I was going to mention her before. She's real big with the cattle mutilations. Oh, she looks like a cat lady now.
You what?
I said after all that work she got done, she looks like a cat person now almost.
Like she's got 20 cats in her house, yeah.
Yeah.
So he would contact all these UFO researchers, John Lear, Senators Harrison, and began to spread this idea regarding the Dulce base and to others in ufology community. And boom, the UFO mythology is cemented, and it came directly from the NSA and what I believe was intelligence agents, Myrna, Henson, and Air Force agents. That's how it was born, and it's all documented, very heavily documented in a book called Clear Intent: The Government Cover-Up of the UFO Experience. Also with a gentleman that wrote about it, George Clinton Andrews, which discussed the Dulce base, the Dulce base, and legends of the legends of the Dulce base, with a book called Extraterrestrials Among Us. A weekly world news article published entitled UFO Base Found in New Mexico, which claimed that invaders from another solar system have set up a secret underground base in the mountains of New Mexico so they can use humans as guinea pigs for genetic experimentation. It's all bullshit. And the Albuquerque Tribune mentioned the anniversary of Paul and Cindy, his wife, the 50th anniversary of Paul Benowitz. Paul Benowitz died on June 23rd, 2003. It was also documented in a book titled Project Beta, The Story of Paul Benowitz, National Security and the Creation of the Modern UFO Myth. Mark Pilkington's book about the project, also called Mirage Men, which was published in 2010. Then the book was then adopted into a documentary in 2013 named of the same name, named Mirage Men, which documents everything that I have just covered and everything that I've just said, except the documentary and the book doesn't really get into the Myrna Henson story that much. But anybody that is interested, I highly recommend checking out the Mirage Men documentary, because that is pretty much all that you need to know about the UFO phenomenon. And Richard Doty is on screen telling the producers and the directors of the documentary that he was hoaxing documents and feeding false information to UFO researchers, including Linda Moulton Howe, Bill Moore, and Paul Benowitz.
Now, I had a quick question. Where did the concept of this Galactic Federation come from? Because I hear these UFO guys all the time talking about, oh, the Galactic Federation won't allow this to happen.
You know
all
who
this
pushed
crap.
that really hard a long time ago? I'm sure they weren't the originals, but I don't know if people remember Project Camelot.
Oh, yeah.
I swear there was something up with them. I really do think they might have been part of the propaganda. And like, they were huge. They were pushed Q before it got huge. And they were always with this Galactic Federation. And they were cool with Linda Moulton Howe and all these other people that are highly suspect.
Yeah, I did a show on this. Let me try and find it, because I thought that the whole Galactic Federation concept and idea came from the Love is One cult. But it actually came before that, in the 90s, I believe. But I can't think of what the name of the cult was.
Have you looked into Simon Parks?
I know the name, but I'm not too familiar with what he talks about.
According to him, he has sex with aliens, and I think like one of his relatives is an alien too, or some shit. He's fucking out there, and he has huge following, or he used to.
Yeah, I can't find it right now, but I did a show on it because I remember believing that the Galactic Federation thing. I mean, the Love Is One definitely did popularize the Galactic Federation myth. She claimed, Amy Carlson claimed that she was God, and that she was the incarnation of God, and she was here to bring the 144,000 into the portal of the sun. And that she was assisted by the Galactic Federation and the dead and deceased Robin Williams that would help her heal people through Zoom calls.
Yeah, and she ended up dying of starvation and what was it? Colloidal silver poisoning.
Yeah, her skin even changed color due to the poison.
Right.
I was like, yo, she
Turned
almost
herself
like
into a gray.
those like greenish, like Egyptian, sometimes every once in a while you'll see an Egyptian like depicted with like almost a greenish color. I was like, what the fuck? Very creepy. Very creepy.
Yeah, that whole thing was very sad.
For how long, right?
It was like 2 months or something like that. They just kept the dead body because they had no idea what to do next. She was thinking for everybody. And Robin Williams never showed up. It's weird. You thought he would.
Right, you would think that as many times as she's claimed contact with Robin Williams, he would manifest and save her, right? I didn't find the Galactic Federation thing, but Order of the Solar Temple was in 1984. I think I said 1974 or 1984. It started in 1984, which ended in the mass ritual suicide of 52 people. Died in total, and out of those 52 people that had died, only 15 people were suicides. So only 15 people knew what was going to happen. The rest thought that they were going to be preparing for some sort of transition and not actually doing the transition, and they were murdered and they were shot in the head. Another really interesting one is the Antrovis cult, which started in Europe in 1980. Antrovis would be linked with two disappearances and the mutilated dead body of a teacher. What Antrovis cult was insane. They actually brainwashed the leader of the cult was a hypnotist, and he actually brainwashed people into thinking that gray extraterrestrials were going to abduct them and take their balls, like take their genitals. And he told them that they would take their genitals to fuel their ships. But the good extraterrestrials, you had to freely give up your genitals to the good extraterrestrials, because the good extraterrestrials also used your genitals to fuel their spacecraft. Wild.
That's crazy. It's feed your kids to Moloch. No, feed your kids to Baal.
Then you also have the Ground Crew Project, that believed that the Earth was on the verge of a cosmic transformation, which was expected to happen when the photon belt passes through by the Earth in the 1990s. Let's see here. You got that one was ran by Sheldon Nidell, which claims that he had extraterrestrial and UFO experiences directly after he was born. That he was abducted by ETs and taken to their planet Sirius as a day-old baby, and he was taught telepathy and given alien implants to make him smarter. Wow. Let's see here. Yep, Sheldon Nidell. Yeah, that one's a really interesting one. Let's see.
I think it's wild you have this many just to run off.
Yeah, there's several of them. There's groups and groups of them. Sheldon Nidell was one of the first people that talked about the Pleiadians. Let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll through here really quickly. Trying to get out of this Ground Crew thing because
It's so funny how like all these little bits and pieces will get picked up by other people and then just repeated as gospel.
Yeah.
Palladians, and reptilians and all the rest of these other races. And then you've got this entire pantheon of, basically just all of these groups that somehow are related to one another, but it all comes from cults. Like some cult leader was there who came up with the story that nobody would believe, and then it just sort of filtered through. It's almost like an alchemical process. All these different imaginations are necessary to get the right messaging to the maximum amount of these people.
You have the universe people from 1997 with Ivo A. Benda, which predicted a cosmic catastrophe and the evacuation of people to another planet by extraterrestrial ships, which obviously didn't happen. Then sent the Ministry of Defense in Slovakia letters asking them if they had plans to defend against evil reptilian lizard people that may invade. You got in August of 1997, you got Teo Chan, which predicted that on March 31st, 1998, God would be seen on Channel 18 all across North America. You got the cult of better known as Universal Medicine, that is known as the Burping Cult, which Serge Binhain claimed to be the Messiah. That was founded in 1999. Claimed to be the Messiah and the direct reincarnation of Leonardo da Vinci, a fucking mystical healer that can see the future, and that there's this master race of 9-foot tall extraterrestrials going around sniffing people. No joke. This dude,
Joe Biden.
Serge Binhain said that he taught his followers that gray extraterrestrials go around smelling people, and they can smell you anywhere. It's unbelievable. So you got the Antrovis cult saying that the gray extraterrestrials come and cut off your testicles to fuel their ships. And then you have Serge Binhain from Universal Medicine saying that they come around and sniff you.
Predictors. They're predictors of the future. Now we got people chopping their testicles off and Joe Biden sniffing kids.
You got the Joy of Satan cult, which is another cult that just stole information from Zecharia Sitchin and Anton LaVey. He would mix in a new ideology, which would incorporate all the different belief systems, and claim that Satan was an extraterrestrial, along with as Inky and Jesus, and together they created the earth and human beings, and that the reptilian extraterrestrials were real demons, and that they mixed their DNA with humans to create the humans that we know that we know of now. Then gets into.
I'm glad you brought up Zecharia Sitchin, because I think he was a huge part, especially with the Anunnaki and Nibiru. I mean, even if you got people believing in Nibiru now, again, this all depends on people's belief. Flat Earth, not flat, whatever the hell's out there. I know there's so many different beliefs, but if you're going to believe in Nibiru, then you're going to have to actually believe in all the planets and everything, like, you're being told from NASA. In a sense, it's just missing Nibiru. You know what I'm saying? So there's I think a thing with his shit is that you have to be pre-programmed to even accept those ideas.
Yeah, he was responsible for a lot of mythology and a lot of that, and he never translated anything. He never translated any of the tablets. He used other people's translations.
And you know what's weird, like, shady about it, I think. And, I mean, I guess I've said this myself before. I mean, there are some things I think that Jordan Maxwell did that, he might have helped with people, but I question that guy to begin with. And like, he gave us, or he promoted Zecharia Sitchin, sure. He pushed him hard.
Well, Jordan Maxwell also regurgitated a lot of his things from the Heaven's Gate cult as well. Almost verbatim, a lot of the things that Marshall Applewhite was saying, because a lot of their stuff was recorded. Like a lot of their interviews, like they would record all of their
I found that shit online and listened to some of it. They got creepy voices.
Wild, but a lot of it was ahead of their time. Like they were talking about how, the human body is just a vessel, and whatever it is that you believe in, manifest in your reality. And whenever you die, whatever it is that you believe in becomes a part of your afterlife, which was a big thing that Jordan Maxwell also talked about. He would say, well, whatever it is that you believe in, if you believe in the flying spaghetti monster when you die, like that's what you're going to meet in the afterlife, which was the exact same thing that Marshall Applewhite had been saying since the late 80s. You got Gloria Lee in 1959 that claimed that she was in telepathic contact with a being called JW from Venus, and she wrote 2 books based on her contact with this JW extraterrestrial from Venus. And a lot of her stuff was published in Fate magazine, which Fate magazine has a long-standing history with whacktards and channelers and UFO people. One of their first ones was, they were responsible for publishing a lot of the Ashtar Galactic Command stuff from George Van Tassel during that time. But they also published a lot of stuff from Gloria Lee. And then Gloria Lee eventually decided to write up plans to give to the United States government for world peace and how to build an intergalactic space station. They didn't listen to her, and then after that she launched a hunger strike, and she told others in the UFO contactee community that she would enter into a coma-like state and be resurrected like Jesus and continue her work with new wisdom and knowledge, which gets into what almost all of these leaders of these cults say. Marshall Applewhite had said it. He said that he was going to die and then be resurrected, him and Bonnie Nettles, but that all came to a huge close whenever Bonnie Nettles died of brain cancer in 1985, and she didn't ascend into the intergalactic spaceship to take her to the next level, the next evolutionary level above human. But Gloria Lee, after she did this hunger strike, and she didn't eat for 66 days.
Oh, that's impressive.
And then she was taken to George Washington University Hospital and died there on December 3rd of 1962 at the age of 36 from starvation. So all the stuff, dude, it's all interconnected. They all play off of each other. They all take things from each other. They all regurgitate each other's information. And it's just one big cosmic jerk off.
It's like a hamster wheel, like a clusterfuck of bullshit, just fucking getting spun around together.
Yep.
Like the same shit just being retold and mixed up with this now and that. I think one thing I didn't want to like interrupt a while ago, but it is kind of like off the topic, but you did mention it before, and I do think it's just like really important, I think, to mention again. But like you also did say that some of this guy's stuff was due to hypnotism, wasn't it?
A few of them were hypnotists. The Edward Malik of the Entrovis cult was a hypnotist. Guy Ballard from the cult of I Am was a hypnotist. So
that one guy that you said that was being I already forgot his name. He was kind of being like used. The guy that you were
Paul
mentioning.
Benowitz?
Yes, yeah. Didn't you say that like some of the things they got from him was like somebody doing like a memory recall?
Yeah, regression, yes.
Yeah, right there. I would say that's bullshit now.
Yep.
I would highly question that. And like,
absolutely,
the thing is that the person could actually be doing something, but it may not be honest.
That's exactly right. The way the regression works, like you can implant thoughts and ideas and beliefs directly into the person that you're regressing, and they can come up with something that never even happened. See, regression is supposed to be used for therapy. I do believe that there is something to regression, but it's not to regress you into figuring out about extraterrestrials and figuring out if you're abducted by aliens. That's something that's been labeled onto it from the community. But regression in a therapeutic use is supposed to be to like try and go back and like heal some of your addictions, like heal like some childhood trauma, and go back and like to help you quit smoking, to help you quit drinking. There's been several studies on hypnotic regression actually working in that sense, but they've taken hypnotic regression and turned it into something to figure out about extraterrestrials and UFOs and being abducted. I mean, that's how all of these early contactees have figured out about their experiences with extraterrestrials and UFOs, going back to Betty and Barney Hill. That's how they knew anything about it, was because they got a regression. So it's nonsense.
There is a lot of people that is, yeah. It's a really good point.
And then it just becomes a whole thing. It's like whenever you're looking for extraterrestrials and you want to see extraterrestrials, and someone is a extraterrestrial regressionist, then that's what you're going to find. Doesn't matter if you actually experience something or not. They're going to make you believe, because that's what you're going to them for. If you're going to an extraterrestrial regressionist or an alien or a UFO regressionist, and you go to them and you think, oh man, I think that I was abducted at some point in my life. Well, guess what you're going to find? Guess what they're going to tell you? Guess what you're paying them to tell you? You're paying them to tell you that you were abducted by aliens.
You would have went to like a Native American, they would have said something else. You know? They would have told you had Cherokee in you somehow.
Well, there's a long tradition of
Hold on 1 second, Headless. Your microphone was screwing up for a second. Yeah, let me see. Go ahead. Ooh, it's still messed up again. Give it like a minute or so. I'm sorry, dude. It's just that sometimes your headphones will do that, but it does fix after a little bit.
That sounded like
that
sounded like a nightmare, bro.
yeah. It sounded, it was aliens contacting.
Quick, I gotta decode those messages real quick. Hold on.
before I put them back on. One thing I did want to bring up, and it's like I hate to bring it back to the Mormons again, but like that was even something that I remember covering with I think Teresa, with something with the Mormons, where they even, like, there was some lady who was caught like that was doing this like regression stuff and actually convincing people they were molested as children when they weren't. They were like, and I was like, yo, like that is sick. But, you know, it seems to work. You can make people believe shit that didn't happen with that stuff.
Absolutely. False memory implantation.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that the Mormons were doing that, because I really haven't, but it is a real thing. You can.
Yeah, no, it's just like somebody associated with like some offspring of some Mormon cult got busted doing that.
Yeah, I chose not to dive too much into the Mormons or Scientology because they're not because I didn't want to. It's just because there's so much there that you have to go back through to get a complete understanding of exactly what was going on, that I just have not had the time to be able to do that, because it's going to take a lot of work. So I kind of stayed off of those two. But yeah, false memory implantation is can be done, and it can be done through regression, and it's proven that it can be done during regression. I mean, it's how easy it is. It can be very easy. Like, you can just say something like, let's say, oh, hey, let's say I'm the regressionist. You're coming to me for regression. I'm an alien regressionist, right? And you come to me and you say, oh, hey, brother, we're in the middle of the regression, and you're like, oh man, I think that maybe this is the military. I'm seeing military officers. I'm seeing military uniforms. I'm seeing that it's in some kind of military base. The easiest thing to get you off track with that is to say, are you sure it's the military? Are you sure you're seeing military officers in military uniform? And then your brain can then adjust, because you're in a very susceptible state. You're in a relaxed state. Then it can turn into extraterrestrials, right? But you just plant that little seed in there, like, oh man, you positive? You positive it was the military? And then that gets their brains switched into maybe possibly thinking that it's something else, and then the memory overlay just lays something else on top of it.
Yep. It's like a little tiptoe to get you to start believing stuff.
Yep.
Again, like I said, sometimes I just think giving the option, is bad enough. Like I do think, a lot of, I'm just guessing that it's quite possible that there's think tanks that come up with some of these just weird sexual identities and then just has someone publish it. And it's like, oh, that's an option now too? I have no friends. I feel weird. That's me now. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, sometimes I think just handing people the option, that's all you have to do, and they could run with it, create their own fairy tale.
Exactly like what has happened with ufology and the story of Paul Benowitz. It's the exact same thing. You feed them all this nonsense, they go out and they tell it to other people take that up, run with it, preach it as fact, go to all these conferences, turn it into something that's very believable, don't tell you where the original thought and idea or theory came from, and then other people hear that and then they take that on as their identity. It's the exact same thing as like what you're talking about.
Yeah, some wild stuff. Is there anything else you had to that you wanted to cover with this, or were you kind of done now? I didn't know if I interrupted you.
No, I think we did a stellar job. Hope everyone.
That's what I was saying. I was like, I think we pretty much. I think we could wrap it up here. That was some real solid shit, man. It was actually a lot more than I had even expected. I did take a peek at some of the stuff you were doing to get an idea. So I mean, you have it's just a lot of like stuff that it's amazing how much shit when you find out where the origination of it comes from, it's either a lie or it should be very questionable.
Yep.
I've never really even looked into all that stuff or even thought about it. So that's some again, like you were saying, is a lot of this all based on lies and misconceptions. And I have often said myself, I do think there is a lot of occultism that is actually due to UFOs and alien, all that stuff. And if there is, then they're going to be selling you a bullshit lie to keep you dumb about what it actually is. In my opinion, I think it might actually be easier to sell the ideas of little green men in a spaceship coming here than maybe what actually is going on. And if people do see something, they knew what actually was going on or who was doing it, it might even be more frightening. So, I do think there's definitely a manipulation game going on with the UFO and alien society and ideas and what's kind of been considered truth in that.
Well, you can almost track that in the words that are being changed, right? So it was UFO, UAP, non-human intelligences. What the hell does that mean?
Didn't
right?
even Hillary Clinton, they say, actually gave us UAP?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, how can you trust any of this stuff at this point? And it's so vague and so nebulous and so, I mean, like, especially the people who are the insiders who are now coming forward. They've got their script memorized perfectly and they're not saying anything that could be tracked to anybody else, and they're saying it perfectly. And that's the real key that everybody should be paying attention to. It's very well rehearsed and very non-specific. And those two things together get a lot of people charged up.
It does. And Sean Kirkpatrick, the head of Arrow, just did an interview where he's talking about how that he's never seen evidence of extraterrestrials. He was head of the government research Arrow into investigating UFOs and extraterrestrials, and he comes out and says that he's never seen any evidence of extraterrestrials. And if you track back all of the phenomenon and all the sightings since the mid-40s, it all is military and experimental military aircraft and R&D, military R&D, right? So you have these people that are trying to tell you what is actually happening, and people aren't believing them. They prefer the lie. So you have a lot of lies that are being said, and when people want that lie, that brings in a whole other layer of the problem into question. Like, they want the fantastic story. They want the story of extraterrestrials. They don't want it to be the government. They don't want it to be the military, because that ruins the entire it ruins ufology. That they can no longer make any money off of it. I mean, these conferences and these people, they make thousands up into millions of dollars off of this
Yeah,
stuff. But if
yeah.
you come out with answers, if you tell them actually what's happening and what's going on, it ruins it. And they can no longer make any of the money off of it.
Yes. The dramatization, fantasies, fairy tales, they sell so well.
Yep.
You're so right, man. You're right. It is. It really. And I'll add, and then I'll add this, and then we'll wrap it up. But like, I even do think again, because why I think like NASA and all this stuff, I think is all wrapped up into occultism. I think that there are occultists out there that understand what is really being portrayed, but realize, and the masses have this sucked up, and I really know how to create my own version of this and sell it myself. I think they ride the wave of seeing what the big boys are really doing. I'm just going to take advantage of this, and I'll rake in a few $100,000. No big deal.
Think about the consulting costs. Like, these people are making tons of money consulting all these different firms, all these different Hollywood agencies to try and put their stories in the movies and everything else. Like a big time UFO consultant can make millions of dollars just on bullshit stories that they've read.
Yep, and when you can regurgitate the myth to the point that you can weaponize the myth, it becomes a moneymaker full of myths and disinformation to fool people, and it gets people easily fooled by scammers and grifters and people that just want to make money off of the mythology. I mean, how many times do people talk about Roswell, dude? Roswell happened decades and decades ago in 1947, but all of these ufologists are still talking about Roswell. Like, what are you doing? Why do you keep going back to that event when you know that it's all government mis and disinformation and didn't become popular until 1980 with Bill Moore's fake made-up book?
Yeah.
It's even another interesting thing, even with like a lot of the stuff that even seems to be pushed heavily with the UFO stuff in the community and people making money. They don't even have to actually even have an answer of what they even think a UFO is. They just have to go on the claims that the government's not telling us.
Yep.
Some of them just run with that. They couldn't even tell you what the hell they really think it is, what the government's not telling us. We got to find out. And it's like, you're not even, like you're saying, you're not even providing an answer.
Well, really, the government hasn't really provided an answer either. They see.
Yeah, no, but I'm just saying, like, they're really not giving you much besides just saying that, and like, people get famous and make a shit ton just from that.
Yeah, they've never confirmed the existence of extraterrestrials. They've literally only thing that they've ever said officially, the Pentagon has ever said, is that UAP is real. It's a real phenomenon. That is all. That doesn't mean that extraterrestrials exist. That doesn't mean that it's extraterrestrial that is in those craft. And really quickly, I wanted to mention this earlier, but I forgot. The whole transition from UFO to UAP that you were mentioning, Headless Giant, was done for a reason. It was done so that really nobody could go back and request files and any kind of reports that the government has on anything that happened before. Because if you write a FOIA request to the government for documents on UFOs, they'll write you back and say that we don't have any documents.
Right.
You have to title it UAP now. When you title it UAP, they'll send you some documents. Right?
Well,
so it's a way to brush.
I think a lot of people need to remember that there is no greater tool of warfare than ambiguity. And this government's main strength in the entire world is total ambiguity. Nobody apparently knows what anything is going on. And this UAP, UFO thing is a perfect example of that.
And then the misnomer of words as well. Like we've talked about the flying saucer misnomer. There's other misnomers that have been regurgitated as well, like national security. It's a threat to national security. It's not a threat to national security because they're extraterrestrials and that they're going to invade and attack us. It's a threat to national security because it's our craft. It's our military craft. And if other governments find out that we have this kind of craft, then and the word gets out, then it makes the United States like defenseless, right? That's the national security that they're talking about. They're not talking about national security risk because of extraterrestrials invading our airspace. It's because if any other countries and other people figure out that it's advanced military craft, then it becomes a problem. It's exactly like the crash retrieval stuff. That is a misnomer as well. It has multiple meanings. It could mean several different things. A crash retrieval doesn't mean an extraterrestrial craft. A crash retrieval could be anything. It can be a down satellite. It could be whatever it is. It could be a blimp. It could be an air balloon. That all can be considered a crash retrieval, but people have it programmed in their head in ufology that a crash retrieval means that it's a crashed alien craft.
Word magic.
Yep.
Very, I like that. I'm glad you added that. Good point. All right, so yeah, I really think you did an amazing job, my man. Just like I said, you even went beyond what I was expecting. So thank you so much. Headless, you want to just remind everybody where they can find your stuff at real quick before we
Sure, you
wrap
can
up?
find me on X, the Headless Giant, and you can follow my podcast on Spotify, the Headless Giant Podcast, and I go live sometimes on YouTube, so check out my YouTube channel.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me on.
Of course, man, always. And Ryder, let everybody know again where they can find all your stuff.
You can find my podcast on any of the podcast platforms at Raised by Giants. I have a YouTube channel at Raised by Giants. If you want to reach out to me personally, you can follow me on Instagram at Raised by Giants 8 or on Twitter, X now,
Yeah.
at Raised by Giants 8 as well. So thank you very much for having me on, gentlemen. And a big shout out to the audience and the people in the chat. Appreciate all you guys, and let's keep this bad boy rolling. Let's keep hitting them, dude.
Yeah. I think this was a really good show, man. Thank you. There was a lot of stuff on here I never even heard of, so I appreciate all of it. Yeah. So check out if you want to check out any of their stuff. Their links are in the bottom. They should be there now, and if not, I will add them after the show. But I'm pretty sure they're there. And yeah, go check out all their stuff. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.